We learned not long ago that a mysterious private donor was jumping in to bail out the government during the shutdown so that some U.S. troops could continue to get paid as Congress continues to take no action, tries to take action, but hasn't taken any action to at least make sure that the troops are paid during the shutdown. Here is a little bit of a back and forth between Donald Trump and a reporter about who might have stepped in with this $130 million donation straight to the government. We can roll the clip.
To find somebody to pay for our troops during the shutdown.
He's a great gentleman. He's a great patriot. He's obviously a very substantial man. And he contributed $130 million toward the military in order to make up any difference. So he wanted to see the military get paid. So did I. And he's a wonderful man, and he doesn't want publicity. He doesn't, he'd prefer, I think, that his name not be mentioned, which is pretty unusual in the world I come from. And he's a big supporter of mine.
Is it an American citizen?
It is, yeah. Great American citizen.
We now know who that donor is. We can put B2 up on the screen. Timothy Mellon of the Mellon family. You actually may remember his name from the 2024 election cycle when he just was pumping money into the Trump campaign, essentially.
He made a $50 million donation to Trump's super PAC.
$50 million.
Yeah, so he's one of Trump's largest donors.
Incredible. He's somewhat of a recluse. He lives in Wyoming. He's a big supporter of Robert F. Kennedy Jr. And his group, the Children's Health Defense Fund, I think is the name of it. And so according to two people familiar with the matter, according to the New York Times, these are the New York Times sources, two people familiar with the matter, it was Timothy Mellon who came in and ended up giving $130 million. Let's roll this clip of Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent on whether or not the troops were getting paid.
We were able to pay the military employees from excess funds at the Pentagon middle of this month. I think we'll be able to pay them beginning in November, but by November 15th, our troops and service members who are willing to risk their lives aren't going to be able to get paid. What an embarrassment.
Yes, what an embarrassment. That's right. it is. And so now you have Timothy Mellon jumping in, which, Krystal, is actually kind of interesting because Republicans have used, it's interesting in a lot of ways, but Republicans have used particularly the troops, just as Democrats did during previous government shutdowns, to say, quote, what an embarrassment. Get to the table, give us the votes. Republicans are typically the ones in the position of withholding votes on a CR to fund the government. Now it's Democrats, and Republicans thought this was their leverage. So it's actually kind of interesting that you have someone, in a way, taking away the leverage that a Republican donor is undercutting their argument that Democrats need to get to the table to negotiate so that troops can get paid. Obviously, there's questions over whether the $130 million is enough to really make a difference.
Apparently, that would be like $100 to each service member.
That's what the Times calculated.
It's one of the weird, it's weird and troubling, and it's worth thinking about the principle of it, even though it's not nearly sufficient to even come close to actually paying the entire military. What, now we've got like random private oligarchs funding the military? Is this really the direction we want to go in at a time when Trump is increasingly using the military as like his own personal force against whatever people and cities and causes that he doesn't particularly like? So the principle of it is disturbing. Potentially illegal, by the way, unclear completely legally, but potentially illegal. So it's like, what is this guy doing when you're not even coming close to solving the problem? I don't know. To me, the whole thing is very strange and troubling in, a way that often Trump regime actions are.
Well, let's put this before on the screen. You can see already for federal workers, there are some lines outside of food pantries. So this is furloughed federal workers in
This is
Maryland.
Landover, Maryland, which is, just outside the Beltway here, in the Beltway area here. And so I saw some restaurants around town when I was walking around D.C. last night who had, 50% off for federal workers. This thing is really starting to bite. People are really starting to feel the pain. Paychecks are starting to be missed. Obviously, workers are furloughed. You're going to have even more workers furloughed after the end of the month. As Besant said there, come November 15th, troops are no longer going to be paid. Doesn't look like they've been sort of like moving different pots of money around. Again, in a way that is not really entirely clear is legal, but they're moving different pots of money around to try to make sure the troops are paid. A lot of times what happens in these shutdowns is that Congress will pass a separate bill saying just like, okay, well, we are going to pay the troops no matter how long this thing goes. But they have not done that. So they're really in the same camp as basically everyone else as this thing stretches out.
Median average saving for an American is $600. And so, it's true that a lot of these workers end up getting back pay, but that's not helpful if you're paycheck to paycheck or even a little bit more comfortable than paycheck to paycheck, because we are now going into what could end up being one of the longest government, actually, it might end up being the longest government shutdown in history because there is no end in sight whatsoever.
Yeah.
And Jake Sherman, loath as I am to invoke any of his wisdom here of Punch Bowl, he says the flaw in this is Democrats have sold their base of membership that they aren't trying to make a point. They're trying to enact change. That's actually kind of an interesting way to put it, because the leverage that Democrats have, well, not the leverage, but the reason that Democrats did the shutdown was to show the base that they're fighting. And so what have they gotten at this point? What can they get at this point out of it? They may get Republicans to negotiate on premiums. It's possible on something for that, but nobody's even talking right now.
Yeah, no, there's really at this point is no end in sight. We did get that report last week that we talked about that maybe Republicans were open to something on the ACA subsidies. I do think Democrats would take, if they could get any kind of a win, I think they would probably take it. Schumer and co. were really forced into this by the base. It was not the politics they wanted to pursue. And their persistence in it, too, is really forced on them by the base, which is really interesting. I think there's kind of a tie-in here with some of the Zoran clip that we'll show of Kathy Hochul and the crowd chanting at her, like, tax the rich. You have now leadership and establishment Democrats really feeling the pressure from just a normie liberal base that is increasingly disgusted with them and wants a more hardline and more radical direction for the party. And so the fact that Democrats, Sagar and I both early on were like, yeah, they're probably going to fold because that's just what they do. The reason we were wrong is because they're feeling much more pressure from their own voters than we expected. And, I think the Trump administration has taken a lot of the sting out of the mass destruction of the federal government workforce. They've been doing that all along. So when you're like, oh, we're going to hurt them more, it's like, well, you were already doing that anyway. And I think they've also been buoyed by a lot of polls that show the public are predominantly blaming Republicans. Yeah. And it makes sense because they are in control of everything. So people just look at this and they're like, you guys run the show, so get it together. You got to negotiate with them, figure something out. And so they feel like Republicans are taking on water with this thing as well, which I think has strengthened some backbones. Another test, though, is going to come. This is really, honestly, really terrible and really dire. We could put B5 up on the screen. Food stamp benefits, SNAP benefits, are going to run out at the end of this month. You've got tens of millions of Americans who rely on SNAP benefits. Originally, it had looked like the administration was going to use some emergency funds to keep those benefits flowing. Now the USDA is saying, nope, we're not going to do that. So, heading into November, heading into the month of Thanksgiving, with the potential loss of those benefits, you've got Americans who are going to go hungry if something is not done to extend this funding or to get the government fully back open.
I'm just thinking about this now. One of the sort of designs behind DOGE is that you kind of can do things, right? Like Republicans are like, hey, you can do things. And so I'm wondering if the USDA SNAP funds run out, if that becomes a sort of predicate for some type of permanent reduction. I don't know, but there may be legal avenues that a Russ vote or someone else the administration tries to pursue to make permanent cuts, like they're trying to do with federal workers. So I'm not sure about that, but I do wonder if that's part of this. We can put the next element on the screen. House Democrats are calling back their members to D.C., according to Punch Bowl Laura Weiss. They're holding in-person caucus meetings tomorrow, so Tuesday, and events on Wednesday. It's possible we see an end to this it's possible by the weekend. I don't know that anybody's particularly optimistic, though. If we put the next element up on the screen, over the weekend, there was a ground stop at LAX. It disrupted flights from LAX to
Nation's
Oakland.
busiest airport.
Yeah, and so the longer this goes on, with people blaming Republicans, I think that's probably stable. Those numbers of Americans blaming Republicans, I would probably put some of the blame on the media for that. I think it's a contrast in how the media's covered it when Republicans literally were the ones withholding their votes. That doesn't mean there's no blame to go around. There's definitely blame to go around in this government shutdown, but then maybe that's weighing on Democrats' minds, that they're sort of technically, if the public is blaming Republicans, they have an upper hand of some sort when they go to negotiation, presumably this week. But the positions are hardened when you look at Republican leadership. They really are not projecting that they're willing to come to the table on premiums and the ACA subsidies. So we'll see.
Yeah, we will. And, I think there's also concern, you were saying, that Vote might use the funding shortage on food stamps to make some sort of permanent cuts, even though, again, it should be illegal. That should be something that has to go through Congress. But, whatever. Laws don't exist anymore, apparently. There's also concern that those federal workers actually who, some of whom are working for free right now, by the way, don't get back pay.
A lot, yeah.
Because he put out a memo saying, we're probably not going to pay, actually. And again, there is a law that was passed that mandates during a shutdown, federal government workers will get their back pay. But this administration just does whatever the hell they want. So I don't think that federal government workers feel particularly secure that they're ever going to see the paychecks that they're missing right now. This is the guy who said that he wants to cause them, what did he say? He wants to cause them trauma or something like that. Yeah. So, that is part of his goal. That's his MO. He's a true ideologue in this regard. And so I don't think anyone should be surprised that he, in particular, who is one of the more powerful members of the administration, certainly one of the more, ideological architects of the direction of this administration, that he would use this as an excuse to create more pain and suffering among the federal government workforce and to shrink the federal government more than they've been able to successfully do with DOGE. And already they ran into, with DOGE, they ran into things where they'd fire a bunch of people from the CDC or whatever and be like, oh, you know what? Actually, we do want to track Ebola, it turns out. Or, they'd fire a bunch of people from that vein and be like, oh, you know what? This whole airplanes crashing to each other situation is not really great. Let's bring some of those people back. They've already had to do some of that. We had the situation in Texas with the floods and a lot of questions over whether or not some of the cuts that have been made to relevant agencies there impacted the ability to respond to those absolutely devastating floods. So they've already run into hitting the bone in some of the cuts that they've made, but there's no sign that individuals like him in particular are interested in slowing down.
Well, and also, listen, I'm someone who thinks SNAP needs significant reforms. I'm somebody who thinks Obamacare needs significant reforms, and Stoller has a good post on that over at Big this morning.
Yeah, I was reading that too.
Yeah, it's super good. But there's a lot of Trump voters who are on SNAP. So that's another, as Democrats return to Washington this week, that's another thing, that's another big piece of leverage. It's another arrow in their quiver as they try to bring Republicans to the table on something, in addition to the subsidies, which Marjorie Taylor Greene has been outspoken about, the Obamacare subsidies. SNAP is that, if you have most of the country blaming Republicans for the shutdown, and then you have troops going unpaid, lines at food pantries, SNAP benefits lapsing, and potential increases in premiums, that's starting to look pretty dire for Republicans if they don't come to the table. True. It's, again, I think it's a different situation than other shutdowns. Democrats are the ones technically withholding the votes, but Republicans, if they're taking the blame with the public, that's a recipe for a political disaster heading into a midterm year. I don't think people vote on shutdowns, a year from now. I'm not sure that'll be on the front of anybody's mind, but obviously it's one of those moments that can make you feel whether this party cares about you or not, the MAGA movement, whether it really, truly has your best interests at hand. That's something that can kind of sink into people's psyche.
They may not vote on the shutdown, but they may well vote on, hey, my premiums just went up 100%. And that's, to your point, about this really disproportionately hitting the MAGA base. 73% of those subsidies go to red states, because it's overwhelmingly the states that didn't expand Medicaid. That's where these subsidies are really filling the gap, and those are all red states. The poor states in the country are all red states, so you'll have a disproportionate number of the SNAP benefits going to those states as well. So yeah, you're talking about a lot of pain specifically for oftentimes Republican voters and oftentimes some of the most diehard supporters of Trump himself.
I mean, yeah, it's one of those. It could potentially be one of those moments, actually, sort of like the Epstein, particularly when Pam Bondi said we're closing the case, basically let's wipe our hands, we're done. It's one of those moments that can make people who thought, as Donald Trump was campaigning, saying everybody's going to have health care.
Right.
I think at the Madison Square Garden rally, he said he was going to cut energy prices in half and inflation was going to significantly decrease. And that's why he's so concerned about the beef, as we talked about earlier in the show, because beef prices are the things that are going high. And he knows, he's shrewd enough politically to know that really matters to voters, because he talked about it on the campaign trail. So it could potentially be one of those moments where the working class section of the MAGA base starts to question whether or not MAGA really does care about them. You could see that happening. And Epstein was a big moment where they said, is this really about what we thought it was about? Does he really care like he said he did? And not everybody in who voted for Trump loves Trump, but there's a level of, he told you everybody else, he was right to tell you everybody else was wrong. Does that mean that he's right?
That he's right. Yeah, and he's actually making things better.
Exactly.
Well, I will say, I think Epstein landed much more clearly, squarely at his feet, because it's like cash, it's his people, right?
Right.
With this, I could see a lot of people blaming Congress. I mean, the thing in the Trump era that we've seen is similar to how Obama had this particular hold on, on a certain population. Trump has this certain hold, and it doesn't translate to the rest of the Republican Party. The midterms, he hasn't done well in midterms in particular. And so the other thing is, maybe people still are like, oh, it's not Trump's fault, this Congress can't get their act together or whatever, but that doesn't exactly make them excited to come out and vote for Republicans in midterm elections upcoming.
Well, it doesn't also necessarily give you the faith in a MAGA candidate that you might have otherwise.
Right.
If they're saying, because there was, the working class had this idea that the Republicans worked for them for a long time. And, we've all talked about why that might be, but that's always been a problem for Republicans, and it's especially a problem if you've already traded a lot of suburban voters for more working class voters, especially in the Rust Belt, places like Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Ohio. So does the MAGA candidate lose some credibility if they're still, your typical Republican in their like Brooks Brothers suit, but they claim to be MAGA? The trust gap is significant when voters who vote for Donald Trump have to go vote for you. Do they even vote, let alone if they do vote, do they vote for you when they see their SNAP benefits lapsing and their premiums about to explode?
Yeah. Feels like a lot of like 2010 level kind of like disillusionment is what I've potentially. We'll see.
Interesting.
Yeah.
We should interview somebody who maybe ran for Congress in 2010.
I think I have an in. See what we could do.
I actually always love when you talk about it, because it was such an important year and there's so many different trends, and that came to like blossom 6 years later.
Yeah, I had a front row seat because I went to so many Tea Party meetings, because my policy was like, anyone in the district invites me to come talk, I will come talk to you. So I got berated by a lot of angry people who thought that I was ushering in Sodom and Gomorrah.
To be fair, you were.
I mean,
Here we are.
What can I say?
Here we are. Have you heard WAP? I blame you for that. I blame you for Cardi B.
You should do your Ben Shapiro-esque rendition, your own rendition of WAP for Assembly.
No.
Hey, if you like that video, hit the like button or leave a comment below. It really helps get the show to more people.
And if you'd like to get the full show ad-free and in your inbox every morning, you can sign up at breakingpoints.com.
That's right. Get the full show, help support the future of independent media at breakingpoints.com.